The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Tonight, can you imagine a high-speed train from Toronto to Quebec City? We've got a bunch of guests tonight who can. Then, actor Robert Picardo joins us to discuss playing one of Star Trek's most unforgettable characters. From high speed to warp speed. That's next on The Agenda. The first study into a high-speed rail corridor between Toronto and Montreal was released in 1970. Now, according to a report by Radio-Canada, the federal government is moving forward with a high-speed train connecting Quebec City and Toronto. What are the challenges in planning and building such a transformative project? Let's find out in Vancouver, British Columbia, Anthony Pearl. He's a professor in the Department of Political Science at Simon Fraser University. He's also a former board member of Via Rail. In Smiths Falls, Ontario, Mayor Sean Panko. And with us here in studio, Leslie Wu, CEO of Civic Action and a former Chief Planning and Development Officer at Metrolinx, and Murtaza Haider, Professor of Data Science and Real Estate Management at Toronto Metropolitan University. He also serves as the Research Director of the Urban Analytics Institute. And it's great to have you two here in our studio. And to our friends in Points Beyond, thanks for joining us on TVO tonight. Murtaza, I want to get you up here first because we got to get some definitions out of the way. We hear about high-speed rail. We hear about high-frequency rail. Are they different?
Yes, they are. High-speed rail means more speed. So anything over 200 kilometers, 300 kilometers, or 400 kilometers is high-speed rail. High frequency means that you run more trains in a given time period. So you're running it frequently rather than just one or two trains in a given day.
And it's not as fast?
There can be high frequency and could be high-speed rail. They're not mutually exclusive.
Gotcha. All right. I would like to ask our director, Sheldon Osmond, to bring this picture up because, as we alluded to in the introduction here, there's nothing new under the sun. This is a picture of the cover of the Intercity Passenger Transport Study completed for the Canadian Transport Commission in 1970. It is one of the first to evaluate the possibility of higher speed trains between Toronto and Montreal, in this case almost 220 kilometers an hour. Wow. So we've been thinking about this. Anthony, I'll bring you in at this point. We've been thinking about this for a very, very long time, and yet it's never happened. How come?
That's a great question. I guess we've always been waiting for the right time to do this, and it's always required an alignment between the federal government and other partners, usually the governments of Ontario and the government of Quebec, and they've never been on the same page so far. We've sometimes gotten 2 out of 3, but that still wasn't enough to move forward.
We'll check back in with you later to see whether we are all on the same page now. But Mayor Panko, I want to ask you, I presume since you've been the mayor of Smiths Falls over the last decade, you've had the odd discussion or two about the possibility of this happening since it would go right near your community. How many chats do you think you've had about this?
Oh, probably at least 2 or 3 a year since 2016. I think it was August 2nd, 2016 is when I first heard from the VHFR people saying there was a planned route which would potentially include our community. And so we've had numerous meetings over time. Each time it was really based on the priority of trying to ensure that Smiths Falls would be part of this project. And from the HFR standpoint, it really started out as HFR. Really, frequency was going to be the key focus. And of course, we've heard now speed being maybe a bigger priority. That does cause maybe some pause or some concern that they may not have as many stops as what we'd like to see. But it's been a lot of dialogue over the last 8 years.
Okay, Leslie, let me ask you, when you were at Metrolinx, how many conversations did you have about the possibility of this happening?
It's probably in the dozens. I stopped counting after a while, so many. And in the context of how an infrastructure like that could fit within a broader network, not just the conversations were about the intersection a lot.
And does this feel more real today than any of those conversations you had back then?
It's closer. It does feel more real, and because I think a lot more work and analysis has gone on, a lot more engagement. But, you know, as they say, the distance between the cup and the lip is still very far.
There we go. There we go. Anthony Pearl, how about you? When you were on the board of Via Rail, lots of conversations about this?
At that point, it was trying to regroup and find something more affordable. At the time, it was thought that high-frequency rail, or what became this high-frequency rail proposal, would be a stepping stone on the way that governments might be able to accept fiscally more easily than a bigger ticket. But it sounds like that has changed. I have trouble imagining that it's going to cost less to build high-speed rail than high-frequency rail, but it sounds like people are presenting it as an affordable option, which would be great if that's true.
Do you want to give us a ballpark figure of what you imagine the difference between the two would be?
I'd be hard-pressed to come up with a good number. I think that the order of magnitude would probably be 2 to 3 times the cost for the full high-speed rail, because the infrastructure would be much more expensive, because it would have to be entirely separated from all other modes of rail and road transportation, and that's costly.
Okay, Tazi, you want to put some numbers on this for us?
It will be prohibitively expensive. It will be a sticker shock that Canadians have not seen before. These are very expensive projects, and the at-grade intersections, the railway crossings, just to turn them into bridges, and there are hundreds of those between Montreal and Toronto, that cost alone would surprise people once the real number comes out.
Well, we've seen some pretty big numbers lately. We had the Premier of Ontario a couple of weeks ago saying he wanted to put a tunnel under the 401, and people mentioned $100 billion, and he didn't blanch at that. Are we talking that kind of number?
It will be more than that. The tunnel could be around, if it's a 60-kilometer tunnel, could be around $30-40 billion. This project could easily be over $60 to $100 billion.
Do you, I mean, we've had you here in the past many times, and you've told us what your preferences are on the different kinds of options for transit. High-frequency rail, high-speed rail. Which do you think we should be doing?
We should be doing high frequency. High speed solves no unmet need right now. The transportation infrastructure has to serve an unmet need if you're spending $100 billion. High frequency to smaller distances, not just Toronto and Montreal, could solve many problems. Congestion in big cities and housing problems in big cities. If you have high frequency rails from bigger centers to smaller centers, so you can disperse the population a little better. Inter-regional rail is a key to improving mobility and affordability in big cities. The intra-city travel between 600-kilometer distances, that requires very high-speed rail, and there's not necessarily an unmet need because airlines are still running. And if you really want to get somewhere in 1 hour, you can take a plane.
Mayor Pankow, do you have a view on which should be built here?
High frequency, certainly. I mean, I think having to make maybe a few 5-minute stops on a long route between Montreal and Ottawa and Toronto absolutely makes sense to enable, one, growth in the rural areas, but two, to realize the alternative would be anyone in Eastern Ontario would have to go to Peterborough or Ottawa or potentially Montreal to catch a high-speed train. And the rail lines are, the Via line already goes through Smith Falls. We have a history of a Canadian Pacific line, a Canadian Northern line, both coming through town. So we've got a long history of rail service through our community, and a dedicated line right now going from Smith Falls to Ottawa. So the frequency is important. It would enable people to catch a train here instead of having to go directly into primarily Ottawa to catch a train.
Leslie, I should get your vote on this. High speed versus high frequency.
So can I say it depends?
Sure.
Because I think what's important to understand is what the benefits, not just the economic benefits of any investment, whether it's 20 billion or 100 billion. And I understand that there is a business case for this. My hope is that the considerations and thinking in the business case take into account broad community benefits that are national, provincial, and local. So that requires us to think about this not just as the project as the end in itself, the speed, not the end in itself, but what it does for nation building, city building. And that balance sheet is actually where the starting point should be, because then you can compare what the benefits are from this investment against other things, and whether or not that whatever billion of dollars can indirectly support other parts of livability, such as affordability, public health, and so forth.
Anthony, is there a case to be made that in terms of community benefits, maybe high speed is the better way to go instead of high frequency?
I think there is over the long term. I think if we would have moved forward in 1970 after that report that you showed the example of, that would have been the time to start with the high frequency. But we're so far behind. We're behind places like Uzbekistan and Morocco. There's now countries that are much less affluent than Canada that have made this work. I think it's time to jump ahead. But I would also add that it's not impossible to have both high frequency and high speed. It is impossible to make high frequency rail as quick as high speed. But the Japanese who invented the Shinkansen, the bullet train, they have operating on the line between Tokyo and Osaka, nonstop trains that are high speed and stopping trains that cover communities of the size of Smiths Falls. So if this is done right, it's not a trade-off of either or. We can have the bullet trains between the major endpoints, which better include the airports as well for intermodal integration, and trains that serve the smaller communities along the way. If it's designed right, it's not an either-or option.
Murtaza, can we have our cake and eat it too?
I don't think so. I think the business case for high-speed rail does not exist. I've been studying it for 28 years, and I've been frustrated by every government and every layer of government. You never see any of these reports in public. I had to go to Access to Information Act to get hundreds of pages of government reports fully redacted, not even telling you how many passengers actually travel.
Why do they do that?
Because they think it's prior. They think it's usually. Well, wait a second. Let me answer this way. When I made that request, I was a professor of transport engineering at McGill University. I thought I'm at a big school. And they would respond. But they said, no, you're not worthy of knowing the very fundamentals of it. And the things are so bad that the survey work that was done, that data was withheld from me, but made available to professors in America who actually taught travel demand forecasting using Canadian data in their workshops. And through there, Frank Kopelman luckily gave me that data that Transport Canada never gave me. So this is what I say, that when you hear someone asking for $60 billion, ask for transparency, saying, where's the business case? Where's the data? Where's the, there are only 2 million people that travel between Montreal and Toronto.
This is what I was going to ask. When you say make the business case, is your point we don't have the population to support this?
Absolutely. We don't have the population that is interested in traveling by train. If you have 2 million people, that's what we have right now. Each trip, even now with the regular fare, is subsidized by $60. From Montreal to Toronto. You run high-speed rail that is much more expensive to build and operate. The subsidy per passenger between Montreal and Toronto would go even higher. And what if you double, triple, or quadruple your mode split from 2 million trips to 4 million to 6 million? It makes not an iota of difference in greenhouse gas emissions in the place, because it still would represent less than 1% of the travel between Montreal and Toronto.
Leslie, the math doesn't sound like it works there.
Well, today, I think we have to think about these investments as legacy investments, and where is the growth happening, and and can we actually accurately predict it? Because yes, if it's 2 million today, it's not going to be 2 million in 20 years from now, and that's the part of the fact base, the scenario planning. You look at the Greater Toronto Hamilton area, the growth that we are seeing, even with the recent moves on immigration, continues to exceed all expectations. And so I think, for all different reasons, including the fact that we didn't think about or plan for this kind of legacy investments, and we took what I call short-term measures for something that really is going to have to be with us for maybe 100 years.
Mayor Pankow, I know it sounds more real today than it has at any time over the last 50 years, but do you think, you see these trains going by all the time. Do we have the population that wants to travel by train in big enough numbers to support this kind of activity?
Well, the frequency and speed are going to be big factors. And in the rural areas, we're traveling any distance now. We're traveling to Ottawa to fly out, to go somewhere. Many times Toronto or Montreal elect to do limited flights in Ottawa. So I think the ability for people in small rural areas or smaller urban areas in Eastern Ontario and beyond, the populations are growing. We've seen great growth in recent years. We expect more growth in the future. More people are working remotely. The federal government loosens up and enables more people to continue to work from home. It's going to help our population grow as well. The quality of life people experience in smaller communities, all these factors lead to growth in rural areas at much greater rates than what we experienced before. And having the ability to hop on a train and be in Montreal in an hour and a half or Toronto in 2 hours, I mean, for people who are even working in those areas, a hybrid work model would function. Living in a smaller area and 2 days a week into a bigger center would be really functional.
Murtaza, you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I think the two elements, like the affluence that we have allows us to have a very high automobile ownership rate. That is the reason why people travel, because we have an affluent. Places that are less affluent or places where automobile ownership by policy is made difficult, like Japan and elsewhere, that's where you will see that rail is a dominant mode. But we are here, and the level automobile ownership in smaller towns and other places is very high, 2 cars, 3 cars per household. The other thing is, I have read that 1970 proposal. In fact, it talked about downtown to downtown commute, the downtown Toronto to downtown Montreal. In the past 50 years, there's been far more growth in the outer suburbs in both Toronto and Montreal. In fact, these places, the core of Montreal and the core of Toronto, the core of Toronto is different because of the condominiums, have not grown much. And if you take out condominiums, you won't see that. So what does it mean? It means that it would take you much longer to get from a suburb to downtown Toronto to board that fast train. So who cares if the train gets you to Montreal in 2 hours when it takes you 4 hours to get to Toronto and get out of Montreal?
Well, okay, let me come back on this. Have you been on the TGV in France, or have you been on the bullet trains in Japan?
I have been on TGV multiple times. I've traveled across China in high-speed rails.
You've got to admit, they're fabulous, aren't they?
They are fabulous, absolutely.
So you don't want that here?
If we can afford it. I like eating at Michelin-starred restaurants, but I can't afford it.
Okay, let me, that was good. Anthony, let me get you on this. Air Canada is part of the consortium that's looking into this right now. And that kind of got my eyebrows raised because, you know, one of the reasons, we've always taken it as a given that the airlines would never support this because, of course, this could potentially take away from their business. So what's Air Canada doing as part of the coalition here?
Well, I think they want to be part of an intermodal offer that allows people to take short trips to and from their long-distance flights, and that's where they're going to make their profit, hopefully, in the future. Short flights are not as money-making for the airlines, and they're not as resilient. We've had, meltdowns in winter extreme weather and summer extreme weather, and with climate change, I think there's going to be even more of that. Now, of course, the high-speed rail has to be made resilient also, but I think it's a proven technology that will allow for future-proofing our intercity transportation system in ways that, Air Canada 2 years ago, they'd invested in some Swedish battery electric plane company. You don't hear them talking about that anymore. We're not going to be having battery electric planes flying between Toronto and Montreal and Ottawa. But we will have electric trains if this proposal comes through. And I think Air Canada wants to be in on that action so that they can connect some of those travelers to flights to Europe, the US, and longer distances.
Leslie, how do you even begin to consider a project this massive? The price tag, the number of stops along the way, the kind of infrastructure you'd have to build, the number of different communities that presumably you'd have to get on side, not to mention Indigenous, First Nations reserves as well. This sounds massive.
Well, it is massive. It's complex. And where do you start? I'm less of the technician in the sense that where I start from always in any planning exercise is who is this for? What is the problem we're solving? And who are all the stakeholders that are vested in this? And is there a concurrence and agreement and alignment on what it is you're trying to accomplish. The project in and of itself is not the end. And so, and it is going to take a long time. It's going to be there for a long time. So you need a constituency of community that is bigger than the project, that is able to take it through. So you start there, and then you identify the vision for what this project brings is X, and then you move towards that, and you measure how you evaluate the investment relative to that, relative to the policy, not just how fast is it, or how long is it, or is it this technology or that technology. Is it really benefiting a wide range of folks who agree at all different scales? So the brokering of the community and the civic engagement required to make sure that this survives political cycles.
Let me pick up on that.
Yeah.
Anthony, that was the next thing I was going to put to you, which is you not only need community engagement every step of the way along the route, but potentially, given how long this will take to build, you're looking at the possibility of getting 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 different governments to flow funds on this kind of thing, maybe from different parties along the way, probably from different parties along the way. Is that doable?
Well, we've done it with a bridge to Prince Edward Island and other big ticket infrastructure projects. But yes, this has to stand the test, the democratic test of changes in government. And there's a real risk that it could be canceled, and then we'd be even worse off. But it's a risk, I think, that has to be taken.
Well, let me ask His Worship the Mayor that question, because we've seen here in the capital city of Ontario, there was a time when one city council decided to opt for LRTs, then they went for subways, then they went back to LRTs, now they're back onto subways. Smart Track was in there at one point. Every council changed what the previous council did. How much do you worry about that pulling the legs out from under this project?
I don't think, no concern municipal level, or I have provincially, federally, probably biggest federal, if that investment is going to be probably the biggest transportation investment made in the country and in the history of our country. And so it's really more a matter of ensuring that politically it's acceptable to all parties who are going to be involved at the federal level. And as we've had 4 transport ministers leading this so far, who knows, number 5 will be that long down the road possibly. So far the commitment has been there. So I would be pretty confident what this project has grown legs. As I said, in 2016 there was some thought we might have trains on the road or on the rails by mid-2020s. Here we are now mid-2020s. Now they're talking maybe 10 years down the road we'll have this in place. But I think we've come so far, there's no turning back now.
Well, let's see. I'm going to ask our director, Sheldon Osmond. Sheldon, if you would, let's bring up the map just after question 12. And, okay, for those listening on podcast, I'm going to describe what we see, which is a map of the southern part of the province of Ontario and then part of Quebec as well. This is the possible Eastern Corridor rail scenario. And it's from Alstom. Alstom, that's the French company that makes all the, the GO train cars up in Thunder Bay and so on. 2022 Alstom proposal included high-frequency and high-speed links. And we've got some lines at differing speeds. Some of the colors of these lines are a train imagining at 144 kilometers an hour. There's another line imagining 200 kilometers an hour. There's another line imagining between 200 and 300 kilometers an hour, starting in Toronto, up to Ottawa, across to Montreal, northeast to Quebec City. Murtaza, I just want to ask you, as you look at that map and the feasibility of that, what jumps out at you?
Well, the first thing is, why am I being taken to Ottawa if I want to go to Montreal, right? Like it violates the fundamental principle of take the shortest possible route, right? And then the other thing that you'd notice is that the speed would differ along the entire corridor. So you won't get a 300 kilometer an hour average speed, even someone tries to build it. The average speed would probably go down to 200 kilometers an hour because you have to stop, you have dwell times, you have acceleration, deceleration time. If a train is moving at 360 kilometers an hour, it takes about 10 kilometers for it to stop. It takes about 3 minutes for it. You apply the brake now, and the physics of it is about 0.5 meters per second square. You'll stop in 10 kilometers. So you add all of those dwell times and unexpected stops, the average speed would be 200 kilometers an hour, but it's still taking you to destinations you didn't want to go. I want to go to Montreal. I would rather go to Montreal rather than Ottawa, but you would try to do it trying to pick up the passengers, but those passenger numbers are even smaller if you look at the numbers. Only Toronto-Montreal corridor has 2 million trips a year. Toronto-Ottawa is probably less than half a million. So just to capitalize on it, or just to bring political support for it, you're going to carve out a route. It would not be as efficient if it were to be direct Toronto-Ottawa line and Toronto-Montreal line. But again, the point is at what cost? The cost is key. When you ask taxpayers money, it's a zero-sum game. The government recently announced an autism strategy and put just $10 million. That $10 million could be $10 billion if we were not to push it to other projects like high-speed rail and say, yeah, 100 billion here or a 50 billion there.
Leslie, do those logistics doom this project in your view?
No, so I have a slightly different view, because I think the numbers, we haven't talked about what is latent demand or induced demand when you can forecast from the trends you've had in the past and just move forward, and the numbers will reflect the current situation. In this region, 75% are single occupancy cars. But if we're trying to make a change, you have to kind of define the vision of where it is you want to get to, how it is you want to move, and then backcast in order to design. So yes, right now the numbers are as said, but if we want to change that, then we have to design the choices for people to make it an option. And right now, the best choice to get to Ottawa may be a plane, not a train. And so if you create the opportunity, you can induce demand and shift where the modes that individuals decide to choose. But it's not just the technology, right? It's the fare, it's the frequency, it's the reliability, all those things.
Your Worship, I want to take you 10 years down the road, maybe 20 years down the road. You'll probably still be the mayor at that time. Tell me what, if this happens, you think it could do for Smiths Falls.
Incredible growth. And I would say not like our community, we would probably double in population or more. But again, Carleton Place is 15 minutes down the road. We've got Perth close by, Brockville close. All of Eastern Ontario would benefit from having this in rural areas. And we have that north-south line now going Brockville, Smiths Falls to Ottawa. I mean, if you're high speed, going back to comments earlier, high speed going through, stopping in Smiths Falls, a spur line running from here to Ottawa, people coming down from Ottawa to catch that line rather than the train going into Ottawa, it's going to help. But overall, we would see immense growth within Eastern Ontario in and around Smiths Falls.
Do you think your present-day constituents would be prepared to put up with the massive disruption that would undoubtedly happen in the 10 or 20 years it would take to do this?
I would say for the most part, yes. But I mean, we see it now where we've had great growth in recent years, as have a lot of the communities around us. And there's always those people who don't want to see any erosion of the small town life they've enjoyed, and certainly don't want to become a city. Want to make sure that they can continue to enjoy the quality of life you have in a smaller community. But I think there would be some concern, but the overall benefit of having high-frequency, high-speed train in our community, connecting us to all the neighboring communities in cities of Ottawa, Montreal, and Toronto, far outweigh any other concerns. And I think municipally, we've had conversations with our neighbors in the area, and everybody's very supportive.
We have just a few minutes left here, and I guess we should get on the record here. And Anthony Pearl, I'll ask you to come in first on this. Some people are promoting this as an antidote to climate change, saying that if we could get, stinky trains off the rails or more cars off the highways and put in nice battery-operated trains that don't add to climate change, that would be worth doing. How persuasive is that argument to you?
Well, if you want a post-carbon mature technology that's already proven, it is electric rail. They're not battery. They're connected directly to the grid through wires. So we don't need to mine any lithium to run these things. It's been done for 100 years and improved efficiency. So climate options, high-speed rail is, and energy security also is a proven technology that I think has to be added into the calculations for some value for that option in the future.
Murtaza, you agree?
No, absolutely not. I've been looking at the data for 28 years. It won't make an iota of difference because, again, at very best, it would have, 1 to 2% of the commuter volume in the corridor. If you really want to make a difference, you have to invest in regional rail, the Metrolinx GO train, and Agence Métropolitaine de Transport, AMT, or whatever is the current one in Quebec. Invest in those, build stronger linkages for bigger cities with smaller towns, including Smith Falls, so people can live in Smith Falls and work in Toronto or other way around. That would have a far bigger impact on greenhouse gas emissions. But the intercity travel between Toronto and Montreal will continue to be auto-dominated. You may move a little bit of people from here to there, but that would not make a humongous difference. For dollar value, if you invest the same dollar in regional train and improve that service, you will have far more volume, people shifting to the regional trains. Getting to Stratford in an hour, getting from Toronto to London, Ontario in an hour or an hour and a half, or Kingston or Guelph, these have far more benefits because people will move to the train rather than driving. But Toronto, Montreal will continue to be auto-dominated.
Leslie, last 30 seconds to you. Do you think this is ever really going to happen?
So yes,
You do?
it will. I do. I mean, look how long we waited for the link to the airport. We are a patient society, clearly. I think it will, and for a couple of reasons. One is the benefits that they haven't really articulated the true benefits, which are much longer term. And so I feel that eventually when we start to grow and we think about this whole part of the country as urbanized centers, 70% of the world is going to be in cities. And what we see now is not what we're going to see in many years. And so the need for it will happen. Whether we want to be ahead of that curve or behind that curve is what we're sitting here asking ourselves.
Let me ask our director to give us a lovely foreshot of our guests. Thank you so much, Sheldon, so that we can thank everybody for coming and having this debate on TVO tonight. You four have given our viewers and listeners a heck of a lot to think about, so thank you for doing that. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There have been precious few television and motion picture franchises that have captivated audiences for 6 decades, but Star Trek has. From the original series to the next generation, from Deep Space Nine and Voyager and Enterprise and many, many more, not to mention 13 movies as well, its success is just astonishing, uniting generations over its mostly positive vision of the future. Robert Picardo is a big part of that legacy. He began playing the Doctor on Voyager almost 30 years ago and is now back in Ontario's capital city working on a new Star Trek series. And with that, we welcome Robert Picardo to TVO. It's so great to have you in that chair.
Thank you, Steve. I'm excited to be here. I hear it's been quite some time since you had an interview with a Star Trek actor.
You know what? Not to date either one of us, but the last guy from Star Trek I interviewed was Leonard Nimoy, probably 30 years ago.
Well, I'm proud just to be the next one.
Amen. Amen to that. I'm going to ask you a very odd first question because my suspicion is people probably thought you got here in a chauffeur-driven limousine. How did you get to this studio?
I had my first experience with the Toronto subway. Now, I'm used to New York, so it was disturbingly clean for me. And the cars felt very much like the Metro in Rome. I don't know if they're made by the same company, but I felt exactly like I was in the Rome Metro, except people were not speaking Italian everywhere, of course.
Right.
But it was a lovely experience, so I have you to thank for introducing me to the Toronto subway.
Well, you actually texted me saying, now, should I take an Uber or should I go on the subway? And I said, you know, an Uber, I know for sure you'll get here on time, but you insisted on using the TTC, so good for you.
Well, my wife is coming to visit this beautiful city shortly, and I just wanted to know enough in case we wanted to go, you know, and explore somewhere when I was off of shooting for a day.
If you don't complain about the subway here, you're not going to make it as a Torontonian, let me tell you.
I don't know why. I guess because you're used to your subway system, but I heard that it was a little behind. I think they were doing some track work, but
don't get us started. Don't get us started. Anyway, take us back. How did you get the part of the holographic Doctor on Voyager to begin with?
Well, it was the regular audition process for an actor. I remember that I was finally working at a theater that I'd longed to work at. for however many years I'd been in Los Angeles, called the Mark Taper Forum in the Music Center in downtown LA. I was doing a new play by Lisa Loomer, and I was playing, strangely enough, a physician with a terrible bedside manner. Didn't realize that was going to pay off. And the point is, I was not available for the pilot. I had a job. And like any good agents, my agent said, lie. Don't tell them you're working. And I went in and I read, but I didn't, I looked at the sides for my character. And here's how he was described. Colorless, humorless, a computer program of a doctor. Now, does that sound like a bucket of fun for a potential 7 years?
I do wonder about when you read the script, and you are not a real person in the show. You're a holographic image.
Right.
Did you ever ask yourself, how exactly am I supposed to save people's lives if I don't exist?
Exactly. And I thought, how do you grab a medical instrument if you're, but that's sort of pseudoscience of Star Trek. You know, the magnetic containment field that creates the illusion of my body can be modulated to allow matter to pass through it or not at my directive. You know, you just make an excuse for the fact that I can handle, you know, well, of course, we're just using transporter, the same technology as a transporter to whatever, matter and energy to matter. You get it. So
you almost sound like you know what you're talking about there.
Well, that's the key.
Yeah,
that's
almost,
the key to working in Star Trek. So in any case, I read the script and I thought, this part, it's got only 9 lines. It seems really boring. Let me read for this other part, which was Neelix, which is the makeup character. Now, they don't tell you how much makeup it is. My agent called and said, you know, how long will the makeup process be? And they go, we'll get back to you. And
well, Neelix must be 4 or 5 hours a day.
Exactly. So you know what they said to my agent? How long? More than 15 minutes. And it's true, 5 hours is more than 15 minutes.
Exactly.
So I actually auditioned for that role. And thank God I didn't get it, because I got 6,000 hours of my life given back to me that I would have spent in makeup. And I don't think I could have handled the makeup as graciously as my co-star, Ethan Phillips, who's one of my closest friends, by the way. I didn't realize that I was competing for the same role. But after I didn't get it, the producers said something that never happens in Hollywood. There's something about his voice. Would he consider coming back and reading for the role we were originally interested in? And now usually, once you've tested for a role, you've gone to the final audition with all the network executives and all. Once they're through with you, you're like a used paper towel. They don't come back. So I was impressed with the fact that they wanted to see me in this other role. I didn't know, really I didn't understand it, but I knew they wanted it to be funny. So I ad-libbed a joke, which got me the job.
Do you remember the joke?
I do indeed. The last moment of the audition, my character, who's a program, has been left running in sickbay and has nothing to do. And the last scripted line was, I believe someone has failed to terminate my program. And I took a long, droll look at all of the executives in the room and I said, I'm a doctor, not a nightlight. And they all laughed, and I was hired that day.
Oh, that's
out of
great.
900 actors who had auditioned, I was later told.
Oh, my goodness.
So ripping off DeForest Kelley.
So you
turned
knew
to be-
about that, obviously.
Well, I don't even remember. I didn't know much about the original Star Trek. I don't know if it was subliminal. I just came up with a joke, but I must have been channeling him. And when I met DeForest later that year, who was just the nicest man, couldn't have been nicer, I said, you know, my character pays homage to you. And he goes, you mean you steal from me? And I said, yes, sir. That's what I mean.
Isn't that great? Because, of course, he said, DeForest Kelley, of course, Leonard McCoy on the original Star Trek series plays the Doctor, and he must say 20 different versions of that line. You know, I'm a doctor, not an escalator. I'm a doctor, not an engineer.
Right.
And you somehow had that ready to go when you needed it.
I must have known that. Damn it, Jim, I'm a doctor, not a bricklayer.
Right on.
So yes, you can go on the internet and search all of the I'm a doctor, not a blank, and then all of us, all the doctors from all of Star Trek's, they have us edited together every time any of us said it.
Now, there is a certain irony in your saying that because, of course, when you went to Yale, you went there to be a doctor.
Yes.
How come you're not a doctor today?
I often wonder. It was easier to
I mean,
be
a real doctor.
Well, to be a fake doctor is easier. You don't have to carry malpractice insurance. Although I can name a number of actors who I think should have to carry malpractice insurance. I'm married to a classmate of mine from Yale. We met in Biology 101. She is a doctor of more than 40 years. And I'm the fake doctor in the household. And if people often ask her, does your husband get asked for medical advice? She goes, oh, yes, he does. And she says, he actually sounds like he knows what he's talking about until you listen to what he's actually saying. So I have the authority, but none of the education to be a real doctor.
Right on. When you got the part on Star Trek, on Voyager, so we're going back 30 years now,
Yes.
did you at that point talk to any of the other sort of previous series Star Trek actors to get a better sense of what you were signing up for?
Yes. Armin Shimmerman, who played Quark, the Ferengi on Deep Space Nine, his character actually guest starred in our pilot. So he was the first one we all befriended, and he gave us the lowdown on how your life would change.
Which is what?
Well, let's put it this way. My agent called and said, you got the part and you got your first 3 convention offers. They were outstanding offers for whomever got the part. So you become part of a long-running international phenomenon, which is Star Trek fandom. And Star Trek is obviously very big in the States, but huge in the UK, and huge in Germany, and quite big in Australia, and then elsewhere in the world. Even in the time I've been on, it's become much more popular in Italy and France, just in the 3 decades that I've been associated with the franchise. So you have opportunities to travel all around the world and meet people who love your work. They may have seen you dubbed into Italian or Spanish or Japanese, or they had enough English in them to watch it in the original English, but they're fans of the show. So you become part of you're joining a phenomenon that's been in existence way before you. I described it, the premiere of our show, as it was like boarding a bus that was already going 60 miles an hour. It was kind of a shock, the leaping on. But then it's a very nice ride.
And how far, have you gone to those far-flung places to go to conventions?
Absolutely.
You dive in.
Yeah.
Because some actors, of course, don't want to do all that stuff. They just want to do the work.
Yeah, it's, I mean, I say to people, okay, here's the burden that you're going to face. You'll walk into a room of 2,000 or 3,000 people who will cheer the moment you enter, stand up and clap for 5 minutes, and then they'll laugh or be on the edge of their seats for everything you say for the next hour. Does that sound that terrible to you?
No.
No, it doesn't sound that terrible at all. I said, especially if you're used to living in a household where no one pays attention to Dad. You kind of, you're happy to have the, people's interest.
I hear there's a cruise, too. Have you done the cruise?
Oh, yes. Now, there were cruises years ago, but they were just small blocks of fans on a regular cruise ship where there might be 200 or 300 Star Trek fans on a ship that had 2,500 people on it. But now, as of the last 7 years, there is an entire dedicated Star Trek cruise, which is an enormous success. And shockingly, it's a lot of fun for the performers. The fans love it, but I meant shockingly, you're one of 40 or 50 celebrities from Shatner all the way down the food chain through all the other series. And you're on a boat with 3,500 fans, and you can't walk out. So, but the fans are so polite. They're not allowed to ask for a selfie. They're not allowed to ask for an autograph unless it's a dedicated session for photos, and that makes all the difference. So they just say, hi, everybody knows me now. I feel like the mayor of a floating town. Hey, Bob, hi, Bob, and I chat with people that I recognize from before. It's a complete delight. And we get to perform with each other, which is a joy, because all of these wonderful actors in all the other series that I never got to work with, we get on stage together and do whatever, a comedy sketch. We sing a duet together. We'll do a scene.
And you sing.
I love to sing.
No, but you're really, for those who don't know, you've got a magnificent voice.
Well, thank you. I would put it 2 pegs below magnificent at very good, but that's kind of you. But I really enjoy the performance on the cruises. We do stuff that's completely dramatic, and then this all the way to the silliest thing you've ever seen. And the fans love it because they see actors outside of the character that they know them from, but also from different iterations of the franchise working together. For example, in one of the shows, I did a comedy duet with Doug Jones, who was on Discovery, playing the alien character, who's a very accomplished mime. So we did Me and My Shadow, where I was singing the song and he was my uncooperative shadow. It was like a vaudeville sketch where he simply would not mirror what I was doing until I got furious at him, and then we have a big fight. So it was a comedy sketch. In the same bill, you had David Ajala from the Royal Shakespeare Company, who was on Discovery, and Armin Shimmerman from Deep Space Nine, very accomplished, classically trained actors, doing a scene from Macbeth together, with Armin playing Claudius to David's Macbeth. I'm sorry, to Hamlet. So that kind of experience is unique for the fans, but it's unique for us too.
Let me ask you one more follow-up about the fans, because ever since William Shatner went on Saturday Night Live and did that piece where he said, come on, you people, move out of your parents' basement, get a life. There is the sense that Star Trek fans are a bunch of nerds who don't have a real life. You've known thousands of them. What are they really like?
As they're, first of all, they're optimists by nature, because Star Trek is all about optimism. It's, you know, after 9/11, we got all this very pessimistic, apocalyptic science fiction, right? Where the world is going to be destroyed, shockingly, and there are a few stragglers still living in the future. But Star Trek is an optimistic vision of humanity's future in space. So those, and they're also the most accepting fan group in the world, because one of the core principles of Star Trek is inclusion and diversity. So basically, I have had nothing but remarkably wonderful interactions with the fans. Some of them are a little intense. Some of them are on the spectrum in some places where once they engage you, they don't want to stop talking to you. But by and large, I have met some incredibly interesting and diverse individuals that are fans of, and some of them are very accomplished attorneys. Some of them work at Jet Propulsion Laboratory, work for NASA. Some of them own, a sci-fi comic store. Whatever they're passionate about Star Trek, and usually they're passionate about what they do in life. So well, I have nothing but great experiences.
Good. Should we see some of your work?
I don't know. Do we have to?
We do.
Yeah, okay.
I'm going to ask our director, Sheldon Osman, to run a clip of you from Star Trek First Contact. This is you playing the Doctor in the movies. Roll it.
Please state the nature of the medical emergency.
20 Borg about to break through that door. We need time to get out of here. Create a diversion.
This isn't part of my program. I'm a doctor, not a doorstop.
Well, do a dance. Tell a story. I don't care. Just give us a few seconds.
According to Starfleet medical research, Borg implants can cause severe skin irritations. Perhaps you'd like an analgesic cream?
Now, there's that line again. I'm a doctor, not a
doorstop.
Was that in the script, or did you make that one up?
That one was in the script. Remember, I did the one at the audition.
Yeah.
So I clearly showed them that I had the cadence.
Okay.
I have to admit that I'm in that movie. That was a movie with the Next Generation cast. Mm-hmm. It was the first solo movie they did. The prior one had been the handoff from the original cast to the Next Gen cast. So this is their first movie. And what the heck am I doing there? I'm in Voyager. And the reason I'm in that movie is because I planted little breadcrumbs to them. I was talking to our producer, Rick Berman, who was overseeing everything in the franchise, all the different shows, plus the movie. And I was in there to talk about directing our show, but as I left, sort of like, Peter Falk in Columbo, as I'm leaving, I kind of go,
one more thing.
I don't understand. I said, first of all, you're going to have a brand new Enterprise in the new movie because you destroyed it at the end of the preview. He says, yeah. I said, well, I don't understand something. Why does Voyager have more advanced technology than your flagship? He said, what do you mean? I said, well, how come they've got this emergency medical hologram program and the Enterprise doesn't? And he laughed. I said, look, I'm not trying to pad my part. I'm just looking out for your logic. And he laughed just like that. And he said, that's a very interesting idea. Then I went around and had the same conversation with the two guys writing the script. And ultimately, John, everyone, it was the same thing. I don't understand something. And then when I did, they said, oh, that's a very interesting idea. Finally, after Jonathan Frakes was going to direct the movie, and I told him the story, and he went, that's a very interesting idea. Then I got a call from the producer one day and said, we have decided to put the emergency medical hologram in the new Star Trek movie. And I went, oh, that's a very interesting idea. So
Wonder where they got that idea
I was going
from.
to say, it was literally like, what do you call it? The La Ronde, right? It's like they are just passing a secret around and having it come back to you.
Well done. That part went well. Now, I have visited your IMDb page, which could go from here to New York City. You've done, I made a few notes here. You made your Broadway debut 40 years ago, more than 40 years ago.
40 years ago.
You've done innumerable television series. Everybody's heard of these series. Kojak, Taxi, Golden Girls, Benson, St. Elsewhere, L.A. Log, Grey's Anatomy. You've done a ton of movies as well. Is it annoying that you will always, probably first and foremost, be remembered for this?
You know, I thought about that when I first got the role. I said, forever, that'll be the first, that's the first line of your obituary, is that you were in, you know. And first of all, Star Trek has been so good to me and made so many remarkable changes in my life that I am perfectly happy that that is the first thing people think of me. But they're also delighted. The fans are so loyal that they'll watch you in another show just because you're in it. So many of them have said, I'm so excited to see Starfleet Academy now because your character's in it.
This is what you're in Toronto doing right now.
I'm in Toronto. They've taken me out of holographic mothballs, and now 30 years on, I'm playing, the character is an artificial intelligence. He's now several hundred years old because, and I'm not saying anything I'm not allowed to say. This has already been said by the producers publicly, but it is set in the more distant future that Star Trek Discovery propelled itself into. So in that future, my character is now several hundred years old, maybe 900 years old.
Now, it's interesting. You looked in the camera there and said, I'm not saying anything I'm not supposed to say.
Oh, yeah, we're very secretive in Star Trek.
How come?
Well, because, first of all, the fans are, well, they kept the secret of my participation for months. I mean, I was first approached a long time ago, and sitting on that secret was tough. But I know that there are severe consequences if you don't. So we all understand. We sign a very long NDA that is longer than my IMDb page. And but it's important because you want the fans to be surprised and delighted when they finally see the show. They have little bits of tantalizing information, like the casting of these extraordinary actors like Holly Hunter and Paul Giamatti, but they hear that. But all they know is that it's about Starfleet Academy, and it's set way in the future, because if you follow Discovery, this terrible thing called the burn basically destroyed. Starfleet Academy had to, everything was destroyed in the future. So now it's come back. So it's really about, rebirth, redemption, all of the great themes of after a tragedy, of rebuilding. So that's all I can say. And I don't think I violated any rules. I'm having a ball working on it, and it's a wonderful circle of life experience for me personally, because everything it's the same, but somehow bigger, different, and better.
Let me ask you one last question, which is, of course, many of us of our generation, we saw Star Trek when it first came out in the middle 1960s. And, it was Bill Shatner, Leonard Nimoy, and DeForest Kelley, and it was their responsibility to take that thing and keep it alive until the next generation could take over, and then they did it, kept it alive until the next and the next and the next. And now it's kind of your responsibility. You're the keeper of the flame for this generation to keep it going so that future generations will also have the pleasure of watching and experiencing. And I just wonder how you regard that responsibility.
First of all, that's a sweet way of looking at it. And I am the bridge. I mean, our executive producer, Alex Kurtzman, has said you're the bridge between the past of Star Trek and the future. And that touched me to hear that. So, yeah, I do feel, I feel that it's a responsibility of a saga that has meant so much to now 3 generations, I guess, of Americans, right? I mean, if you count, a generation's 25 years. Star Trek is in its 58th year or something, so we're working on 3. generations that find some kind of solace and comfort in the fact that we'll not only have a future that far out, humanity, but that it will be a positive one. And all sorts of problems we seem to have in the present that are, that are kind of toxic seem to have been, seem to be worked through in the future. And obviously, Star Trek is darker, a little darker now than it was, the newer shows. The fact that this thing called the burn happened in the future, and really so many different cultures were damaged or destroyed. But now the optimism of renewing our commitment to our ideals and rebuilding, all of that is those are really important things, messages to hear in troubled times. Obviously, the original Star Trek was during the turbulent 60s, and times are fairly turbulent right now with a lot of disagreement. And I'm always surprised that we have fans on both sides of an election, for example, where from my perspective, I think, well, gee, the core values of the show seem to suggest this, but we have very dedicated fans who love the show, who feel quite differently about some present-day issues. So the most important thing is you hope that the overall message of, we are at our best when we find commonality and we work together in spite of our difference, that overriding, whatever the outcome is of our present election process in the States, that we will go beyond and look at the greater message of Star Trek is that people from all different backgrounds and alien backgrounds and all that working together in harmony toward a common goal.
Amen. I am delighted, first of all, that you could take yourself away from what I know are probably 14-hour-long shoot days to spend some time with us here, and that you decided to boldly go where many don't go because it's a difficult way to get around, namely our public transit system here. But I'm so glad you made the time for us. Robert Picardo, thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve. I had a wonderful time.
And that is the agenda for Wednesday, October 30th, 2024. Tomorrow, can Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, known as the BRICS, and other emerging economies supplant the West as the world's most influential geopolitical bloc? I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.